Hey everyone, I'm Maria. I'm with Cobalt Property Management here in the Twin Cities, and I'm here to answer frequently asked questions about emotional support animals, or ESAs. So I get quite a few questions about emotional support animals, and it is federally and state regulated. And so I created a video to try to answer the questions that I hear most frequently. First of all, what is an ESA? ESA stands for Emotional Support Animal. It's similar to a service animal, but it's needed for emotional reasons as opposed to physical disabilities. What it is not a pet. So it's a necessarily prescribed reasonable accommodation that's supported by the ADA or the Americans with Disabilities. It's regulated differently and it cannot be treated as a pet. Why does my tenant need an ESA? Your tenant would need to meet the definition of the Americans with Disabilities Act's definition of disabled, and that permits them to request a reasonable accommodation to their home. It also protects their privacy. So while you're asking why they may need an emotional support animal, the answer would just be they meet the definition of disability. Um, they are not required to give specific information regarding what their disability is or why they were specifically prescribed an animal in this case. So, can I charge pet fees for a pet deposit? No. It's protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So any reasonable accommodation, it does not cost you money. And if there's any care needs or accommodations to the home, the cost goes on the tenant, but you're not able to charge any fees like you would for a pet. So at Cobalt, we charge a pet deposit and a pet fee if someone has a pet, but in an emotional support animal situation, we are not able to um, request any fees, including deposits. And then what documentation can I require for an ESA? That's probably the best question because it is highly regulated and there's specific items that you can ask for and things that you're not able to ask for. And there's two ways to get to the answers. You can either one, request a letter from the licensed healthcare professional that your tenant is seeing and who essentially prescribed the animal. I use quotes because it's not like a medical prescription, but it is requested by a healthcare professional, so it's treated the same. And then the other way you could do it is you could provide a packet or a form that your company or you have written or an attorney has written that essentially requests the same information, so you're getting all the same information. So this documentation would need to include three things. Number one, it needs to be from a licensed professional. When we request a letter, I always ask that it's on company letterhead or the letterhead of the firm that the healthcare professional works at. And they need to be licensed. And the Minnesota state where I manage properties, there's a very specific list of who is allowed to prescribe an emotional support animal. And so it would need to be from somebody who's licensed in one of those fields. Number two, needs to confirm that the tenant has a disability. Remember that the Americans with Disability Act protects privacy, so it doesn't need to say what the disability is. All it needs to do is confirm that the tenant does meet the definition of disability given by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then number three, it needs to confirm the relationship between the tenant's disability and the need for a service animal. Again, doesn't need to give you specifics, what job the animal does, why they need this specific animal, why they may need more than one. It just needs to confirm that they do indeed need the animal because of their disability. There are a couple things to remember to watch for when you're looking at this documentation. I mentioned before that sometimes residents have more than one emotional support animal. If that's the case, that needs to be documented in the letter or the packet. So the licensed healthcare professional does need to state that more than one animal is needed in order for them to basically do their job. If it does not provide supporting documentation or supporting wording around this, and your resident does have more than one emotional support animal, in that case, the other animals then would be considered pets. So The emotional support animal would not be charged fees, but the other animals would be charged deposits and fees. The other point, and this is probably, I think, the most crucial, because we're seeing a lot more tenants who are finding services online to get emotional support letters from licensed healthcare professionals out of state that they don't necessarily have a treatment relationship with. A lot of times, and I would say most of the time, tenants don't understand this difference. They know they need an emotional support animal, and they see online that there's a service that will allow them to label or register their animal as certified emotional support. Well, that doesn't meet the Minnesota state statute surrounding these requirements. So I've had to have conversations with tenants in the past and say, you need to have an existing treatment relationship. I can accept it if your healthcare professional is stating that you need it. Otherwise, we just treat it as a pet. So you can request proof that there's an existing treatment relationship with the tenant already. So something that shows that this tenant has been seeking professional help from a healthcare provider and that they really did prescribe this based on the need of the tenant. And also, state statute does say that you can reject if the author operates primarily to provide certification for a service or support animal. What this means is you can immediately reject and deny if you can show that the letter is from a healthcare professional that really is just in the service of writing letters for people that they don't have a treatment plan with. All right. Documentation that you cannot ask for would include anything along the lines of medical records or some sort of proof that a tenant actually has disability. If they're seeking professional help from a licensed healthcare provider, you trust that they meet the definition of somebody with a disability. You're not able to ask for any documentation, any medical records, anything showing they have a disability at all. And then along those lines, though, any fraudulent documentation. So if you're able to prove that the person who filled out the packet is not necessarily a medical provider and they're not licensed, that is grounds for denial. So you can deny the request for an emotional support animal if you don't have these documentations clearly shown to you by the tenant. So those are the most frequently asked questions that I get about emotional support animals. Remember, the best advice that I can give you is don't think of it as a pet. Think of it as any other reasonable accommodation. So what I tell the owners that ask me questions is we're just going to rename it grab bar and shower. And that's the best way to think about it, that you're not able to take on any fees, but they are responsible for any damages. And you can still request that they sign an animal addendum. So instead of having a pet addendum, Cobalt Property Management has an animal addendum. The animal addendum works for service animals, emotional support animals, and pets, and it clearly lays out the rules for having any animals on our property. That includes that they need to stay on leashes. Service animals, emotional support animals are not exempt from a leash law. It needs to state that they're all required to be up to date on their vaccinations. If the city that your property manage or your rental property is in requires that they're licensed, again, licensing rules still apply to emotional support and service animals as well. So you can still have documentation and request and require your tenants to follow rules for having animals on property, but you just can't treat them necessarily as a pet. It's just animals across the board. So remember, shower grab bar is what we're thinking about for emotional support animals and service animals in this case. It's the easiest way to try to keep them straight. And again, there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, and your property manager probably knows the rules pretty well. If you're looking for a property manager in the Twin Cities area, I'm Maria. I'm with Cobalt Property Management. My email is maria@cobaltmanagers.com. And our website is www.cobaltmanagers.com. If you have any more questions, obviously reach out to me. And if you'd like to have a conversation about us managing your property, do that as well. Until next time.